how do you wrangle an emotional, hormonal like teenager who's also like making money and like if you like don't give him McDonald's, he's gonna stop making apps.
David,
Yes, dear.
what were you doing at 13 years old?
13. Let's see. Well, my family had just moved to Ireland because my dad's company moved us over there for a short time period. I was going to school. Oh, and because we were from Denver, and because Dynasty, you remember the big hair 1980s nighttime soap opera?
Real Housewives before Real Housewives.
Exactly. Was the #1 show in Ireland. I spent a lot of time telling kids I did not have an Alexis Carrington aunt, nor did our family drive a Bentley.
I was more Team Crystal anyway.
How about you?
I was trying to survive 7th grade in central Pennsylvania on a $5 a week allowance. So at any period during this, any time during this period in your life, did you try to start your own business?
Oh, heck no.
Me either.
Yeah, but you know what? Our guest today did. Welcome to Living Not So Fabulously.
Today we're chatting with Michael Saman, the app kid. At 13, first-generation American, Michael became a tech entrepreneur, creating his first successful app, Club Penguin Sheets, to support his immigrant parents and his younger sister.
At 17, Michael became Facebook's youngest employee. Facebook's teen in residence contributed to Instagram stories, then went on to work at Google and Roblox before founding his own company, Friendly Apps.
Despite his successes, Michael faced pressure to support his family and navigate life as a young gay man, as he shared in his memoir, The App Kid. Let's hear more about Michael's unique childhood. So, Michael, you found yourself in the enviable or maybe unenviable position of being a first-generation American who was sort of the breadwinner for your family at the ripe age of 13 years old. Is that correct?
I was about 11 years old when I was living with my parents, kind of having this, I guess, what you would call a typical middle class life when the recession from 2008 had started to like boil over for my parents. They had just been accruing a lot of debt and eventually just lost all of their financial footing. At that point, we were evicted from our house and all the rest of it. But at the same time, I was becoming obsessed with the latest technology, all of the new apps that were coming out and learning how to code. At that age, I decided to try to make my own apps with the primary goal of making some business out of it and maybe not having to do my homework anymore. I started earning maybe about $10,000 a month shortly after launching my first apps when I was 13. And my parents were able to kind of keep things going again once I started making these apps.
Being the person who's responsible for generating money is stressful for an adult. So I can't imagine what that was like as a 13-year-old. How did you cope with that? How did you balance that at such a young age?
I think it was tough both for me and my parents. For my dad, for my mom, it was just hard for them to like think about what, like what to do with me and the 13-year-old antics and emotions and feelings that I had about how to deal with money. I obviously disagreed with my parents on how to handle things, but I also, being 13, didn't really know how to manage money either. And so it was an interesting situation where my parents maybe didn't have the best, I guess, like advice from friends around them on how to handle their situation. And I myself was an inexperienced 13-year-old generating, hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue and trying to help my parents figure out how to do it too. And that was, that was quite weird.
Yeah. It's almost like you took the normal family script and you flipped it on its head, right? This all of a sudden you are the one who's the breadwinner. You're the one who
Yeah.
is bringing in the money, but at the same time you're looking to others to help you make decisions because as a 13-year-old, you're not versed in whether you had a financial experience with your family before or during that time period. None of us are prepared for I'm now all of a sudden the breadwinner as a 13-year-old. How did that
That's
affect
right.
you physically? Because I think you've mentioned this
Oh my
before.
goodness, yes. I just loved McDonald's. That I'll tell you that. I spent most of my time eating McDonald's or just trying my best to cope with the stress by eating.
Yeah.
Whatever it meant. But like I didn't do PE. I would skip PE class and I would just spend time working on apps. I think posture is also another one of those things where it's like, why does my back hurt? Oh, that's right. I spent my whole childhood, leaning into the laptop. Things like that, I don't wish them on anybody. And I think, if I could go back in time, I would have just told myself, look, just go outside, walk around, play with friends, and just try to be a kid. I didn't really get a chance to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And from your perspective, how did your parents deal with that? That has to be somewhat of a daunting task to have your child generating most, if not all, of the money for you, but yet you're still responsible for them.
Yeah, as difficult as it was, and oh my god, the fights and all the yelling. Like, we made it through, and that's kinda how it was, but it was hard. It was so difficult. I mean, what kind of parent, wants to deal with that, and how could parents, like, discipline a child who they also have to, like, deal with the finances, right? Like,
Right.
that's the part where I feel I missed out the most and I was the most unaware of, is, like, just how little discipline I could receive as a kid
Mhm.
because, like, how do you wrangle an emotional, hormonal, like, teenager who's also, like, making money and, like, if you, like, don't give him McDonald's, he's gonna stop making apps, right? Like like, it's ridiculous, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah,
It's
I mean, they did what they could.
I know I probably shouldn't, but I kind of feel like having a McDonald's hamburger right now. So that was the first portion of our interview with Michael Saman.
I can't imagine the weight of responsibility he felt being the breadwinner for his entire family.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be almost as if, David, you had to pay your dad an allowance to help him pay his mortgage.
Oh, hell no. That won't ever happen. And before you push me down that rabbit hole, let's take a quick break. Welcome back. We have more of Michael's amazing interview for you.
Yeah, what I like best about the second part of our interview with Michael is you can almost see the number crunching, the analytics
Right.
going on inside of his head as he talks about the cost benefit analysis that he did to decide whether or not going to college made sense for him. And he chose a non-traditional option, which reminds me a little bit of your story.
You're right. I was a non-traditional student. I didn't go to college until I was 29, in part because I had a full-time job. And I did do a cost-benefit analysis and kind of looked at the numbers. And one of the things I did realize was that I could get $5,250 a year of tuition reimbursement to pay for college. So I wanted to get a 4-year degree, and I spread it over 5 years,
Nice.
working part-time and going to school full-time, so that I ended up getting roughly about $26,000 towards my tuition and books, and that ended up paying for about 80 to 85% of that.
Nice. So let's see how Michael came to the decision that he came to.
It's clear that your family was dealt a hand that is not typical, right? You're faced with all of these differences with the way in which your family was dealing with life that were not what the average family ends up with. I think there's another thing that you were faced with early on in your life that very few of us are, and that is the fact that at 17 years old, you were hired by one of the largest social media companies in the world. Facebook reached out to you and said that they want to bring you on, and you're faced with this idea of, do I go work for Facebook or do I go to college? How did you think through that, and how did you make that final decision to end up going to Facebook?
Well, for one, we couldn't afford college. So if I
There
wanted
you
to
go.
go, I would have had to take on debt, right? Which was frankly, a decision that I think, um, while not easy, made sense, I think, financially. I really thought about it as a kid. Like, I spent a lot of time in school just observing, right? And I think, I don't know, having been gay in high school, scared to tell anybody, kind of made it less likely that I would just be myself around everyone and more likely that I would just close up and just observe how everyone else interacts because I'm just, afraid of being myself. And that situation actually, I think, led me to understand better not only social dynamics for building products, but also like how how does the job market even work? Like how do people get jobs? And I remember just sitting in class and seeing my teacher try to tell us, you know, if we don't go to college, then we won't get a degree. And if we don't get a college degree, then we won't be able to get our first starting job. And if we can't get that first starting job, then we're not going to have money. And if we don't have money, then we're going to end up under a bridge, right? Like
Right.
this is kind of like an exaggerated tale, but they would tell us this in general, and kids around me in school would be scared, right? They'd be scared that like they need to get into the best school. And so they would say, "Well, how do you get into the best school?" "Well, you need to have the best grades. So you gotta do your homework and you gotta pay attention," right? And so the competition for having a good life was getting the best grades in school. And I thought about that and I just told myself like, "There's no way I'm going to be able to compete to have the best grades. Maybe I can do well if I study, but it just something about that system felt off to me." Like,
Mhm.
there's people who get into college who don't have good grades, but because their family went to that school, they just get to go. Like, I was like, "Okay, well, that's kinda weird." And a bunch of other inconsistencies that I thought, like, there must be something more fundamental to getting a job than having this piece of paper, right? Surely the world can't be this illogical, I thought. And
Right.
so and so I thought about it further and I thought, well, what does a degree communicate? And I realized a degree communicates that one might be able to do the job. And so I asked myself, well, what other things do people who get jobs tend to have in their resumes or interviews? And usually, the first thing that I thought of when I was, I don't know, 13, 14 was, well, people have referrals, right? People get referrals. And I think, well, what does a referral and a degree have in common? And I realized at that point that it's trust. It's trust that the person can do the job. So, what getting a job really requires is that the person at the other end looking to hire somebody trusts enough that you can do the job, right? And so if that was the case, I told myself as a kid, then getting a degree and going to college is one of many ways in which you can try by proxy to build trust with the company that might want to hire you. And so at that point, I realized, okay, well, everybody is competing to get into the same schools. Everybody is competing to get the best grades on the same tests. And I thought, well, I could go that route, or I could try to build trust in a different way. And the way I went about doing that was to say, well, if I'm going to build apps and I want to code and I want to get a job in the coding industry, I can either compete with everybody else in my school to get the best grades in computer science and so on, or I could just build apps, put them on the internet, put my name on it, and have that be my resume, have that be the trust, that can be built by a company in knowing that I'm able to do the job that they're hiring for. And I thought to myself, there's no difference there.
Yeah. I'll just say, for many of us right now, we have the blown mind emoji coming out of the top of our heads because I'm thinking to myself, at 13 or 14 years old, most people don't think through the process of how do I get a job? And I think what you've just shared with so many of us is that there are multiple ways to get to the goal that you have. And nine times out of 10, you can follow the path that everybody else follows, but that 1/10 of the group of people go a different path, and oftentimes that's the one that we are all inspired by, is the fact that you've gone down this different path.
I think what he articulated is that for career planning is more cooking than it is baking, right? Baking is a science. You've got to follow the recipe to a T, otherwise it's not going to rise, right? But cooking is a little bit more of an art. And I think so few of us think about career planning that way, because I think, to your point, we're told in grade school and in high school, you've got to get the good grades, you've got to pay attention to this, you've got to ace these tests, you've got to go to college, because otherwise, you're going to be living under a bridge. And that's not true, especially now today with the way that college costs are higher than they've ever been.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that you said in your book, The App Kid, that you were concerned that no one would take you seriously if they knew you were gay.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that, about why you
Well,
thought
my
that.
family, yeah. Yeah, my family's from South America. But wait, sorry, continue.
No, I want to kind of understand why you
Yeah.
thought that, and what has the result been, because you are definitely out now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's been a bit now, and I mean, it feels great, but it definitely what do you call it? I was scared. My parents were scared for me, right? Like we did not grow up in, a community that was necessarily accepting of, LGBT, and I personally, you know, growing up surrounded by people who would make all kinds of jokes and stuff, um, and maybe even to this day would, like, make me doubt myself on it, right? Like,
Hmm.
is, like, really hard because it makes it so much more difficult to, like, even just know how to move forward, right? When somebody isn't quite sure of, whether or not they're attracted to the which gender, or how that works, or if it's normal, if it's not normal, what that means. Um, I think people just have a tendency to think like, "Oh, everybody is kind of like us."
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, especially close people to me growing up, just felt like, well, they just must be like me, and assume that, like, the same way in which I work is the same way they do. And that was tough because I also assumed that I was like others. And so when they would tell me, "Oh, are you sure it's not just a phase?" In my mind, I would actually think, well, if they're saying that it's a phase and a bunch of people are telling me it might be a phase, well, is it a phase? I don't know. Maybe it is. How would I know? And
Hmm.
and there's those types of questions that I'd ask myself. But it really hit me, I think, when I got older, and I would watch these movies, and recently I saw one too where it's like coming of age stories of kids in high school, middle school, as they're like, becoming teenagers, and maybe getting into romantic interests and stuff like that when they're in school, and they have a crush and they want to talk to them, and it's this guy and this girl, and they're trying to figure out if they like each other or not, and those moments, and watching those movies and thinking to myself, as a kid, I would think to myself, well, that's not real, right? That doesn't actually happen, right? Like, most of us are definitely not doing that, right? And I would just think that as a kid. I got older and I realized, wait a minute, no. A bunch of people did do that. I just didn't have that experience. Um and it's just interesting because it's a little sad, right? Like, part of me thinking that is me trying to rationalize why my experience was not that. Would I have loved to be able to go back in time and just have those little moments in middle school and in high school where, you have the crush, and you don't know, and you're trying to have that conversation and see how it goes, and it just, we didn't get to have that.
As we close out this interview, I'm curious, what would you say to the 13-year-old or 17-year-old app kid today who's not sure if they have a place in the tech world or even just the corporate world altogether?
I would I would say not to worry about whether or not there's a place for them in this or that or whatever it may be. If anything, I would focus more on what do you want to do with your life? What do you want to do that makes you happy? And realize that the world is a playground where you get to have fun and you get to do these things if you truly want them. And not to get bogged down on that because everybody has an opinion about what one should do or what one should be. And if you ask enough people, they'll tell you every possible career path you can take, and it'll get you nowhere closer to knowing what you want. And so just really think about what do you want to do with your life and realize that the only thing that stops one from getting there is their own, I guess, doubts and um insecurities. I really think we're living in an era now where anyone can pick up a computer, especially when it comes to coding, and build an app and come up with a product and get it started and put their name out there and build up that resume and learn as much as they want without having to spend money. The most important thing I did was learn to find those resources around me, learn to, collect all of that information and put that together so that I can uh, build out a career without spending money I didn't have.
Mm.
And I feel very lucky that we live in a time where we can do that. And the types of products that come as a result of it are going to be so much better because people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford to do it can do it now. Um, I would say be excited about that and have fun with it. Life is meant to be fun, and if you're not doing that, you know, try your best because it's not always going to be fun. But at, at least for me, I feel like if we don't strive for that, then what's the point?
Exactly.
It's a great way to end the interview. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Well, that completes our interview with Michael. I always love talking with him.
I do too. One of the things I really loved about that second portion of the interview was he used this idea of life is a playground. And I think we all have the choice as to whether or not we're going to play on that playground, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So what are the big takeaways from today's episode? Well, I think probably the first one, maybe we all need to tap the shoulder of our local congressman and say, it's time to up that tuition reimbursement federal limit to more than $5,250 because it's at the same amount as it was when I went to school 25 years ago.
Yeah, a lot of inflation has happened since then.
A little bit.
I think number two is in addition to talking about the income premium, the idea that you will earn more money or might earn more money if you go to college, we need to start talking about the wealth premium. How much debt are you going to then carry into adulthood or into your work life to help pay off those student loans? And what kind of quality of life is that going to provide you?
Right.
And then number three, best of all, I think what Michael did was he did that cost-benefit analysis. And I think guidance counselors, parents, students, they need to encourage the student to do that cost-benefit analysis and weigh whether or not the degree they want to get makes sense for them and whether or not the school they want to go to makes sense for them.
100%. So thanks for joining us again, and until next time, stay fabulous.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.